Hi, you all. Welcome. I am Lori Preston, welcoming you to the Museum of Boulder. I get to be the executive director of this pretty special place, so I wanted to welcome you and make sure that you're comfortable and that you know where things are, like exits behind this table if you need it, or that way if you need it. I also just want to say real quickly, how many of you are here at the Museum of Boulder for the very first time? Yay! Yay! I love seeing that. So thank you. Is it shocking? Would you have thought they would have been here, Carl? I know. And so now we're glad you're here. And I do want you to know what you're sitting. Yeah, come back for sure. Because you're only seeing a tiny slice of the museum, but we actually have 3 floors plus an incredible rooftop, and I want you to know that you're welcome to come back at any time. You are sitting in a space that we use for community conversations just like this, so we always keep whatever exhibit is in here 2-dimensional so that we can fill it with chairs, and it can be a workshop, it can be an art, an art class or something like that. So we want you to know that right now, and it's very pertinent and relevant for timing. You're in a space right now that's honoring the anniversary of the 10 lives that we lost a little bit over a year ago on March 22nd, 2021. And so we were really mindful to stay way out on the periphery. So the portraits that you're surrounded by and what normally would be rotating on that television screen are people who were more on the periphery rather than actual families of victims, etc., because we really feel like it's still a very sensitive time. It's too soon to honor it in a different way, but there are incredible stories around you of people in our community and a sampling of some of the things that were left on the fence. So one of our missions at the Museum of Boulder is to honor history that happens. It's happening right now. And so this is a good example of that, as well as, in rooms next to us that go back much, much further. Some of you may not realize, but we are 78 years old, which is pretty crazy. And we've been in this spot since 2015. It was purchased and then renovated. It was the Masons' building. So it was a historic building, and we're very, very honored that we got that piece of property in 2015 and really worked on it and moved in 2018. So some of you, I think, were a part of some of the significant fundraising and awareness of our community during that time. So thank you for doing that. That's your tie to history. Please know that there are restrooms on this floor, but there are also restrooms on the first floor. I would love for you to take a peek at the rooftop sometime this evening. It's pretty dramatic when you can go out there and look at the Flatirons view. Right now, it's pretty amazing. But just don't get yourself locked out up there. Put a doorstop in the door if you go out. But I in August had the privilege of becoming a Rotarian. And what I see hanging out with some of the people that are in this room is just a common denominator of honoring those things that are in our community and people who are in our community and efforts. And this whole conversation around the pillars and the history behind them is very, very important for us to learn. And so the fact that we have someone in our midst, Bill Meyer, who is right here, and also a fellow Rotarian, connections to the museum in that he shares one of his partners, I believe, or at least a lawyer for sure in his firm, Keith Edwards, who is on our board. So we're really pleased with Hutchison, Black, and Cook and that connection. I also know that he has quite the prestigious honors of being a super lawyer. This is his 16th birthday for being a sweet 16 of being honored as a super lawyer. So we're honored that we have someone with this brilliance looking at this whole situation and kind of orchestrating. So Bill, we're glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it over to you, but I'm here if you need me. I'm going to go up and down every once in a while and make sure no one else is coming in, and just welcome to the museum. I do want you to feel underneath your chairs because someone has a year membership to the Museum of Boulder. And if you don't feel it under your chair, feel under a chair maybe around you, or even, tip one back and we'll just see. There you go. So you have a membership now, a year membership. So fill that out and make sure that I get that. And we'll see you all year long. All right. They can arm wrestle. Welcome. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Lori. First of all, I want to thank the Museum of Boulder for hosting this, and this is hallowed ground to be in here at this point in time, and yet what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight is also some hallowed ground. What we're going to talk about tonight is a story that started about 9 months ago, trying to figure out what those two stone pillars were and what was going on with them. About 9 months ago, I drove through that intersection and saw they're moving some dirt around. And I looked at it and said, that didn't quite look right to me. So I started making some calls and asking some questions and was able eventually to get to the story that we're going to talk about tonight, about how the pillars came to be where they are, what they are, and what's happened to them at the moment. And this is part of a process where down the road, that's probably a bad cliche, in a few weeks, in a few months, we hope to have some answers as to what's going to happen with the pillars in the future. After I finish, we've got three panelists here, and I'll introduce them one at a time when the time comes, who are going to fill in a little more detail. And so I'm going to move relatively quickly through the story of the pillars as I understand it. We'll have the panelists speak, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So these are the pillars at 9 Mile Corner. Where did the story begin? Oh, sure. We had them down earlier, and there we go. Thank you. The story of the pillars actually begins with America's love affair with the automobile. Back in the teens of the last century, the 19-teens, automobiles were just starting to get to the point where they were widespread and somewhat dependable. Tourists started hitting the road. That was a big deal because prior to that time, if you were a tourist, you had to get on a train and ride a train somewhere. When you had a car, as we all now know, you could go where you wanted to go. And that was a revelation for many middle-class Americans who had a car, had a little bit of money, and wanted to go see the sights. The problem was there were no roads. And so in 1913, the Lincoln Highway Association was formed to develop a road from New York to San Francisco, a transcontinental road that was all-weather, hopefully to be paved, so that people could travel cross-country without getting stuck in the mud or lost or anything else. Now, the Lincoln Highway was developed, the red line as you see there. There was a commission that was appointed, went around the country looking for roads that were at least passable that they could incorporate into this road. Colorado desperately wanted to be on the Lincoln Highway, but the route went north through Nebraska through Wyoming and beyond. And so there was a huge lobbying effort by the Colorado congressional delegation, the governor, the newspapers, you name it, to try and get the road rerouted, the Lincoln Highway, rerouted through Colorado. And so what they came up with was the so-called Colorado Loop, which was an alternate route where cars would come, or people could turn off at Big Springs, Nebraska, favorite place for all of us that ever drive back that direction, to Denver, and then from Denver north up to Cheyenne. Now that was great news for Boulder County, because when you come north out of Denver, almost invariably you have to go through Boulder County. So that was a big deal. And the businessmen and civic boosters in Boulder County were absolutely enthralled with it. To make it even more important, and I believe it was 1915, yes, Rocky Mountain National Park was created. And suddenly you had a huge attraction for anybody,
It might be.
just as today, from the Midwest, who wanted to come out and see the sights of the Rocky Mountains. So that became a new destination for tens of thousands of tourists. Now, there was a problem with this for the city of Boulder. The Lincoln Highway went from Lafayette north through various county roads. First 111th, that you would turn, those of you know Lafayette, the cemetery, if you're coming west, you turn north on 111th Street, go past the cemetery up to 109th, over to 100, or go up, I forget whether it's not Jasper, but anyway, you jog over, hit 109th, go north, and eventually hit what was 107th, which took, at that point, was a straight line into Longmont. Boulder was over here. And between Boulder and the Lincoln Highway was something called the Valley Road, later became known as Arapahoe,
Where are you?
which was a
Oh, I wondered if you could see anything. I think I hear it.
dirty, dusty, got it, Fred? A dirty, dusty, unpaved road that was not very accommodating, I'll put it that way. And the turnoff, the Lincoln Highway, to Boulder on the Arapahoe Road was called 10 Mile Corner. And we'll see why that's important later. So several forces came together to solve this problem for the city of Boulder. The first was a movement for memorials, roads of remembrance, right after the end of World War I.
Well, let's just watch it
The
here.
American Forestry Society Association took up this cause to have roads of remembrance created in honor
What happened to the
of
sound?
World War I with trees
Is it?
lining both sides
Is
of the
it?
road. Okay. The American Forestry Association took up the cause, and soon editors of newspapers all over the country took up the cause. It wasn't long before the American Legion, which was just formed at the end of World War I. The American Legion was formed initially after World War I, and the only soldiers or veterans that could join were those who had served in World War I. So the American Legion joined the cause, and soon the two came together. the American Legion, the Lincoln Highway Association started talking about we need to have stretches of the Lincoln Highway become roads of remembrance all through the country. Well, that movement soon came to Boulder. And the champion was a gentleman named Edgar Broughton Hill, E.B. Hill. He was a gold miner from up in the mountains, but also a Republican politician. When the seat opened up to be the road commissioner for District 1, which included City of Boulder, Lafayette, Longmont, he was appointed. And E.B. Hill took up the cause of the Road of Remembrance. Now, the original plan for the Road of Remembrance was to start at 10 Mile Corner, in other words, what's now the corner of 111th and Arapahoe, and plant shade trees on both sides of the road all the way. Now, this was to be a very, very elaborate road. As you can see, trees at regular intervals. At every crossroads, grass, flowers will be set out, miniature gardens. Small lakes adjacent to the highway, parks, you name it. It was supposed to be a 10-mile parkway from 111th and Arapahoe into the city of Boulder. Now, there were some problems at that point with the Lincoln Highway. Now, this has nothing really to do with the story, but when I was doing my research, I came across it. It turns out that the Lincoln Highway just north of Lafayette was a haven for bootleggers. They had, quote, soft drink parlors north of Lafayette, which were very, very popular, both with patrons and with the gendarmes. They were constantly raiding them. But there are other problems with the Lincoln Highway as it was originally laid out. As you can see, there are a whole variety of curves. Now remember, these were dirt roads. There was nothing paved back then. These were all dirt roads. And there were a lot of sharp angle corners and turns. And there were constantly accidents. I mean, I in doing the research, you've just found dozens of stories in the various newspapers about these accidents. Because remember, cars in those days, while they were better than they were in 1910, were still very, very dangerous, didn't control well, didn't corner well. There were no driver's licenses. And I suspect because of the soft drink parlors, there were more than one or two people inebriated on the road. In any event, it was a very dangerous stretch of road. So, E.B. Hill and the other commissioners and the state, I forget what its actual title was, I think it was State Highway Department at that time, came up with a new idea. And that was to build a new Lincoln Highway. In other words, go west and then go straight up to 107th Street. And that way eliminate all of those turns, corners, etc. It's a nice straight stretch. The intersection of the new Lincoln Highway and Arapahoe Road, which is out in the middle of a field at that point, was 9 Mile Corner. So that's the genesis of the term 9 Mile Corner. It didn't exist until the new Lincoln Highway was built. Well, like anything in Boulder County, the battles began. People in Lafayette opposed it. People in Longmont opposed it because they knew what was happening. Even if moving the road over a little bit closer to Boulder cut down on the amount of traffic that might be going up their way and increased it into Boulder. The farmers, at least some of the farmers, were opposed to it, because just like today, farmers don't like new roads going through their farms. I think we have a number of people here from CDOT. They can probably tell stories within the last 7 days, probably, of similar sorts of fights, but there was a big fight. Interestingly enough, since we're talking history, the leader of that fight was a gentleman named J.O.V. Wise. Now, those of you that are history buffs and know the Wise Museum and the Wise Homestead over in Erie, that's J.O.V. Wise. He led the fight against the new Lincoln Highway. In any event, the state condemned the ground, went to court, and the farmers got a grand total of $11,096.50 for their property, for the right-of-way for the new Lincoln Highway. Well, the battle between Boulder and Longmont, Lafayette continued. As you can see, the number of cars on that stretch of road continued to grow. Over about a quarter of them that went up over that stretch would turn to Boulder, but 3/4 kept going north or south. So Boulder started a campaign to increase the amount of traffic headed for Boulder. Longmont didn't like it. Longmont had numerous grievances. One was they alleged there was a secret meeting by the Boulder Good Roads Committee, which, by the way, was formed by Boulder Rotary Club, but that's another issue, with the state to get favorable treatment for the road. Another was that Boulder distributed 40,000 maps, which, according to Longmont, quote, "The aged or infirmed, without the aid of a powerful finding glass, could not possibly locate Longmont on the map used by Boulder." So the battle was joined. At 10 Mile Corner, we're still at 10 Mile Corner, Boulder put up a sign. The Boulder American Legion put it up. I love the finger. Boulder, this way. Huge sign. But they took it a step further. They erected a hut on the corner and hired a, quote, rather genial and fluent talker to stand at the corner, pass out brochures, and talk up the virtues of going west, turning left to go to Boulder. Well, mysteriously, one night, that hut burned down. There were a lot of theories as to why it burned down, who burned it down. But from the Longmont paper, it said there was others who claimed that it was an overabundance of Boulder hot air that caused the fire. So, to this day, I don't think anybody's ever figured out exactly who or why that was burned down. Well, because they now had a new highway and a new intersection, Boulder had a new weapon in the fight. The state engineer, the district engineer, a gentleman named Douglas. Working with E.B. Hill, Mr. Douglas came up with a rather elaborate plan for the intersection of Arapahoe and the new Lincoln Highway. It was to be a Y, where, as you can see, there were, we call them turn lanes now. They called it a Y back there on the other side with a park in the middle. And it was, again, this is a quote. It says, "The triangle will be formed between the two arcs. Where the two arcs meet, a stone gateway somewhat similar to that which guards the entrance to the Denver Mountain Parks above Golden will be erected." But perhaps more important to Boulder, the purpose of the gateway was to attract tourists. Boulder wanted something that would cause people, instead of going straight towards Longmont, to turn left, turn west, and go to Boulder. And they wanted an elaborate gateway that would perform that function. So, the gateway, which we now call the pillars, was constructed. The funding was handled by the Boulder Lions Club, cost of $1,300. It was designed by Meade Walter, who was an architect and a member of the Lions Club. It was patterned after the stone gateways at Lookout Mountain Park and at the CU campus. Those are the gateways at Lookout Mountain Park. You can see the similarity. It was constructed by Leroy Watson, who's a mason who built some of the structures there. And Chris Watson is here tonight. She's the granddaughter of Leroy Watson. Probably has more stories to tell than I do. In 1918, in April of 1918, they broke the ground, which was a fairly big event. There were 250 people, dignitaries, etc. 2 months later, they dedicated it. Dedication had over 1,000 people, speakers from all over the country, bands, you name it. And this was the dedication day when the pillars were dedicated. Now there's another part to the gateway which came about in part through an act passed by Congress after literally years of debate about what to do with all of the trophies that the American expeditionary forces, American forces who fought in World War I, brought back from Europe. And it was decided that they would divvy them up state by state in an equitable manner, and each state would pass them out however they wanted to pass them out. And so Boulder, Legion Post 10 here in Boulder, got 4 cannons. 4 allegedly German cannons. It turns out 3 of them were German, 1 was a French cannon. Why they captured a French cannon, I don't know. But again, a story for another day. And so the Legion then constructed on that triangle that we were just looking at, a park using one of the cannons, put up a flagpole, etc. Cannon pointing directly down the road. Again, that is a curiosity, but that was what the design was. And so in 1929, that was constructed. Now remember, at that point in time, the rest of the road of remembrance was also supposed to be built. Well, that part of it, probably because of the Depression, maybe for other reasons, never happened. Now there's a lot more to this story, and I'll put in a shameless plug. If you go to the website, 9milecornerpillars.com, a lot more pictures, a lot more information about this history. What I want to do now is talk about what happened after the pillars were built. The gateway soon began to suffer. One of the first things was billboards went up. Remember the Y we talked about? It soon became littered with billboards. And the Lions protested, but the county commissioner said, nothing we could do, that's private land. And they were probably right back in those days. But the park that we just looked at, built by the Legion, started to have its own problems. And as it began to deteriorate, particularly as cars began to pick up higher speeds coming around those corners, we have a couple of people here, I think, who were first responders in those days that can tell stories about scraping people particularly drunks, off the cannons late at night. And more often than not, they hit the concrete abutment, but at one point somebody was going fast enough, they went over the abutment and took out the cannon, and it couldn't be repaired. So the cannon was removed. I think that was in '73. In 1983, it was decided that they needed to reconstruct that intersection. They were widening what was by then 287, US 287, and they decided to take this Y out and basically straighten the road. Remember how it was configured before? And so that Arapahoe Road would go straight and you wouldn't have that dangerous Y situation. But to do that, they had to move one of the monuments to create enough space between them to be able to get an expanded 4-lane road. Well, there was a problem with that. Flatiron Paving Company, and I'm a retired lawyer, and Flatiron Paving Company was my client, was hired to do the road work. They hired a guy named Tom Whitlock, who was a mover, I think from Lafayette or Louisville, who attempted to move the pillar 35 to 40 feet to the north, and he had a slight accident. It toppled over. So the north pillar is not in its original condition. It's been rebuilt. It was rebuilt by Dell's Masonry up in Longmont, still in business. I think one of our speakers just talked to him a couple of days ago and may have a little more information. But in any event, the north pillar was rebuilt 35 to 40 feet further north to widen the space between the two pillars. So this was what the intersection looked like before the widening. This is what the intersection looked like after the widening, basically from 1983 until summer of 2021. Well, I think all of us in the room probably are aware of 9 Mile Corner, the development that's going in there. There's the intersection. This is before the reconstruction, but that intersection was right at the northwest corner of the development, and because it was built, it was an intersection of two major highways, the developer decided that additional work needed to be done. So the developer came up with a new plan. And I'm not sure you can see the pillars, but those circles are where the pillars are. Remember, the pillars under the old plan, the road went between them. They'd been widened, spread out, but the road went between them. It was still a gateway. The new plan called for putting the right-hand turn lane on the south side, on the outside of the south pillar, and routing other traffic between them, and leaving the pillar on what traffic engineers call a pork chop island, sort of out in the middle of the roadway. Now, there's a statutory process that's involved here. When a developer seeks a permit from CDOT to do that kind of work, they have to identify all structures of historical significance that might be adversely affected. If a determination is made that the work will be adversely impact that structure, then the developer and CDOT must come up with a plan to either eliminate the adverse effect or mitigate its impacts. That mitigation plan must be submitted to the State Historical Preservation Officer for approval. That process was not followed. No historic preservation compliance review was required, and no mitigation plan was developed. And so the developer went ahead and constructed the highway in accordance with the plan he put together. And as you can see, that's where we are today. Now, after Boulder Rotary and some of the others in the room began talking about this, CDOT went ahead and did an after-the-fact historic preservation review to determine whether, in fact, these structures were eligible for listing on the State Register of Historic Places, and also whether they were being impacted. The determination was, and this is a CDOT review, not mine, this is a CDOT survey, that the physical integrity of the pillars has been substantially diminished, that the recent construction greatly impacted the integrity of the historic setting, in other words, what it looks like around the pillars, and that the raised pork chop traffic island, that one's hard for me to say, equipped with a big guardrail, adds a new and serious vehicular hazard. So, that brings us to where we are today. CDOT determined and invited Boulder Rotary and a number of other groups in this room to participate and develop a plan for the preservation, maintenance, and monitoring of those pillars in the future. The Mitigation Working Group will hold meetings to discuss and develop a plan. This meeting is sort of a precursor to the first of those meetings, which will be held on April 12th at the Lafayette YMCA at 7 p.m., where we will begin the discussion of the various alternatives for the pillars. And we'll talk about everything from tearing them down to taking them, putting them on the Boulder Mall. There are all sorts of ideas, and we'll put them all on the table. And the idea will be to see if we can come up with a consensus, to see if the community can come together around an idea which maybe nobody will like, but it's the best in an imperfect situation. So I invite you all to come to that meeting. And I again want to thank the Museum, Boulder Historical Society, and the Carnegie Library, which has helped immensely in a lot of the research we've done here. With that, I'd like to turn this over to three of the panelists here. The first one is Gail Elias with Daughters of the American Revolution, DAR, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the memorial purposes that sort of have gotten lost in all this. The memory, the gateway is honoring the memory of those people who fought in World War I. And so, Gail, if you'd like to.
No, I think I can manage without the light. I would really kind of like to have my PowerPoint, and if I can remember which of the buttons I'm supposed to push, I'll be glad to get through this. The one on the right. So I appreciate you inviting me to be part of the panel. I'm glad to talk with you about the memorial purpose of these towers. Now, for me to do that, I need you to time travel with me about 100 years, back to 1922. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what life might have been like here in Boulder in 1922. Where did that come from? Okay. Yes. Maybe. Okay, here we go. So in 1920, there were about 32,000 people living in all of Boulder County. In the town of Erie, there were about 100 people. Today, more people live in the town of Erie than lived in all of Boulder County in 1920. There'd been a lot of stuff that had happened to the folks of Boulder County in their recent experience. Although the war had been raging in Europe for about 3 years, I think. The U.S. entered the war in April of 1917 and signed the armistice. Who remembers what Armistice Day is? November 11th, 1918. Excellent. Bad news. The poorly named Spanish flu, which was not Spanish at all, began in about February of 1918 and ended about April of 1920. Oh. And did I mention something about Prohibition? So I think if we were to just put ourselves into the experience of those folks in Boulder County, we might say that it had been a pretty awful couple of years. We have no idea how awful. So why a memorial? You know, I love the stories that Bill tells about the movers and shakers of Boulder and Longmont and Lafayette duking it out. The reality is, for us common folk, that would not very much have been the way we were thinking about our lives at that time. What I think would be much more real to us is this. In that same time period, in 1920, there were, well, a little before that, there were 6,117 men between the ages of 18 and 41 who are of age to serve. So the odds are really, really good that you would know people who were called to serve. Of that crew, about 25% of them did, through both enlistment and draft, and in all the branches of the military. Of that crew, 1,506 came back, but 24 didn't. And here's the very, very interesting thing. I can tell you from some wonderful resources that Family Search has online that of the folks who passed away, 70%, more than 70% died of disease. So specifically think about influenza and other diseases circulating in barracks. We have about, I think it's roughly 20% who were killed in action, and the remainder died of wounds. This is all taken from the roster of men and women who served in the World War. What's pretty interesting to me is that these people have names. I know their names. And they have faces. So these are men, mostly men, look for a few women, who are real and who did not come home. And so it is almost certain that you, if you lived in Louisville, you would know the man from Louisville, John Jackowitz, who died. You would know who these folks are. What I can tell you is they're all gone. The last World War I veteran from the U.S. died in 2011. The last worldwide died in Britain in 2014. I would also bet you that the people who are standing by those pillars have also passed. And so my take on a lot of this is that they have left us with a mission, which is to honor their memory, to serve, to use this opportunity to preserve their memory and not to allow these towers to fall into oblivion. We also, I think, have a teachable moment here. If we think about how we might use the towers and use the experience of the people that we know from Boulder to help to educate and to, as a bottom line, never forget. As a country, we may have had disagreements about the justness of any particular war, but I will bet you that everyone in this room can name memorials on a national level that are dedicated to those people. The Tomb of the Unknowns. From my generation, it's the Wall. This is the same thing, but it's more personal to us because it's here in Boulder County, and it is unique to Boulder County and to this state. So I think the reason why these towers need to continue is so that we don't forget the service and the sacrifice of not only the men who went, but the people who supported them in this county. That's really all I have to say. I think the bottom line's pretty obvious. We can't forget these. So, who's up?
Thank you, Gail. Thank you so much. Next is Patrick O'Rourke with Historic Boulder, who's been out, yeah. And turn the lights on. Who's been out and spent some time looking at the pillars and going to tell us a little bit about their current condition.
Thank you, Bill. Could you do me a favor, bring up the slide about 12 back from Bill, the current pictures of it? Is that possible? Yeah, either one would be fine, just to describe, because I'd like to describe the pillars to you as you're looking at it, as possible. You go back maybe, even the current one. So Bill asked me to take a look at these pillars, and we had a structural engineer look at it as well. He couldn't be here tonight. So I thought I would describe the pillars physically, what they are. That one would be fine. I think that would be fine. Obviously, there's two pillars. Originally, they were built approximately 40 feet apart, and currently they're 80 feet apart. The pillar that you're looking at, if you go back to the... That's too funny. If you can look at the pillars, if possible. I'll wait. Okay, the pillar on the left is the original pillar, and then obviously they moved the one on the right. They're mirrors of each other, so I thought I'd describe them to you. They're 32 feet long. They have two wing walls, so each pillar has a 4 foot by 4 foot, approximately 5 foot high end post, and then an 8 foot wing wall. And then the center column that you're looking at there is 8 feet by 8 feet. And I measured it to approximately 22 feet high in the center. And I'll tell you a story about why that number might be different. And then it continues on as a mirror image on the other side. It goes 8 feet and then a 4 foot by 4 foot column at the end, and they have a coping stone on it. The center of the column itself is hollow. So, and they opened it up, I think about a week ago or less than a week ago to take a look at the inside. What's interesting about it is the column on the left, and it explains why the column on the right fell down. It doesn't have a footing underneath it. It's actually built on the ground. And so you could just imagine when they were trying to move the one on the right, and they started to maybe excavate and go around it, it started to collapse. And the newspaper article itself said it took about 10 minutes for it to fall down. And you just imagine the sandy soil that they have here in Boulder, and a little bit of water underneath it, and there you go. And there's no stopping it. The structural engineer took a look at it. The masonry work on it is strong, and so it's not in any immediate jeopardy of falling down by any means. They thought that the quality, the workmanship that the Dell's Masonry, I think it was the name of the company, they did a very good job of it. The pillar on the right, even though it looks equidistant, or actually it might look a little lower than the one on the left, it isn't. It's actually taller. And the reason for that is that there's a slope in the street. And so when I came out, I measured it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, for some reason, they just don't look the same. And so what I did is I started to measure the heights of the floors and the heights of the columns themselves. And it turns out that the column on the left has about 2 feet of fill on the sides of it before. So when they opened it up and they saw a ditch basically in the middle of the center column. And the base of the column itself was about 20 inches below grade. And they had to do that obviously for the street in order to get the drainage away from it. Past that, the inside of it is hollow, which I thought was interesting. And this is the third time I've seen this presentation. I'm always learning something from it. The center column used to be, besides for being empty, there's windows there, and it's hard to tell it, but the windows were open, and according to a gentleman that lived next door to it, from Lafayette, he said he used to chase the birds out of there many, many years ago, and they've been enclosed. And so the question is, if they're moved, do you restore it back to that original condition, or do you bring it back to this condition? Past that, the only concern we have is the column on the left appears to have a slight pitch to it. Not that it's an immediate danger of falling down, and leave it to a structural engineer, because I looked at these pillars probably 7 or 8 times, and I didn't notice it. And the first thing he said is, oh, by the way, the column on the left is tilting. To what degree he was not, it wasn't a concern of his. Obviously, the concern we have is with the heavy traffic going by these and the vibrations from the heavy trucks going back and forth. Eventually, these pillars, the structure of them might become in jeopardy. Past that, Bill, that's about it. I can answer any questions you might have. And the column on the right is on a foundation, by the way.
Yes, we'll have a Q&A after this. One other thing I just wanted to mention, because Patrick wasn't able to come out when we were out there and opened it up, the pillars were designed to be lighted. There are spotlights in the end panels that are now covered, but were intended to shine back on the pillars. And we think, although I'm not sure we have and Jason may want to talk about this, we have a solid understanding, but it looks like the interior of the pillars were to be lighted. Remember, when this was built, it was built out in the middle of the prairie. And there was no rural electrification out there. They didn't have electricity. But if you saw in some of what we talked about earlier, they anticipated, because they were building the Belmont power plant at that point, that at some point there would be power out there. And so I think they designed it to be lighted so that the lights would shine out through the windows and then the spotlights would shine on it. Whether that actually happened or not, we don't know. Last, I'd like to have Jason Marmer from CDOT talk a little bit about what CDOT has done and what CDOT hopes to do going forward.
Can I have the light on, please? Thanks. Hi, thanks for inviting CDOT here. I'm Jason Marmore, Senior Historian at CDOT Region 4 in Greeley, and I brought with me a couple of other CDOT employees, Jim Usen, who's head of our Planning and Environmental Department, and Jacqueline Giles, who is a historian and also works with local agencies doing environmental clearances. Excuse me. I'm going to have to work from my notes. I'm not good at winging it, so forgive me. And Bill touched on a lot of the stuff that I was going to talk about as far as the process that CDOT has to deal with, but I'll just go explain probably in a little more detail about that. As an agency, we're mandated to consider the effects of transportation projects on historical resources, which are typically defined as man-made structures, architecture, could be ditches, roads, whatever, that are at least 50 years old. There are some exceptions, but that's generally how we define historical resources. And so for our projects, we have to typically comply with different legislation depending on if the project is federally funded or state-only funded. In this case, with the pillars, it was, this whole situation was triggered by an access permit request from the developer to do the intersection work at 287 and Arapahoe. And we typically, when an access permit is issued, we have to look and evaluate if there are any environmental resources that could be impacted, not only historical resources, it could be wetlands, hazardous waste below the surface, that sort of thing. So there is sort of a vetting process. We don't just, give the issue an access permit. But in this case, there was an inadvertent missing of the fact that the pillars were at that location. Can't really explain how that happened, but that was the what kind of initiated this whole process. And Bill Meyer contacted me and brought the whole situation to our attention. And as he mentioned, we had to do what's called an after-the-fact consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office and other interested parties and stakeholders. And so basically, the after-the-fact investigation that we did basically follows the same steps we do when it's not after the fact in terms of identifying. I'll just speak about historical resources. Is we typically have to look at the site, also look at the State Historic Preservation Officer's records on known previously recorded historical resources. And that was missed on this one. But in any event, with the after-the-fact consultation that we're doing, we basically brought the situation to the attention of the State Historic Preservation Office and told them we were going to, what happened and that we're going to do this after-the-fact consultation. So I went out and prepared a survey form, redocumented the pillars, and submitted that to SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, for their concurrence, their review and concurrence. And that's where we, verified that they were significant structures. And the other thing we had to do is look at the effects of this project upon the pillars. And in doing so, as Bill's slide showed, not only were the pillars experiencing some pretty bad deterioration, but also lost my train of thought. Well, anyway, we basically looked at the effects to them and found that the setting had been dramatically changed, and having the pillar on that south pillar on that pork chop traffic island was not only hazardous, but that greatly changed the historic setting as well. So we basically said that there had been an adverse effect to the resource. And to deal with that, to try to rectify the situation, we suggested to the State Historic Preservation Office that we would develop a mitigation plan and leverage off the work done by Bill and the Rotary Club and his associates, which is terrific. That's been tremendously helpful. And I really applaud the work done by you, Bill, and your group, and you, all of you. But so anyway, we we consulted with the Preservation Office as well as with a bunch of potential stakeholders and veterans organizations. What else were there? Community governments, historic preservation commissions and boards, and just to bring as many interested parties into the conversation about it and to come up with a good solution. And we're thrilled that there are so many interested parties. I mean, it's tremendous. I've never seen this in my career. Other than that, it pretty much explains what we're doing. And then after the mitigation plan is developed at the end of this whole process, there will be a decision made, ultimately, hopefully consensus about what to do with the pillars, whether to, where to move them if they're going to be moved. Looking at, oh, thank you. How'd you know? Anyway, a decision will be made. And I know Bill was hoping we could get the pillars rededicated after they're potentially moved and restored, to have them rededicated, hopefully on Veterans Day 2022. So we're hoping that schedule can be met. I'm very pleased that we were able to get a engineering consulting firm, specialized company out of Denver, Building Restoration Specialties, to come out and look at the pillars, inspect them, and that's when we opened them up. I think it was last Thursday. And so the next step is they're going to come up with a cost estimate and a scope of work to actually consider moving the pillars, just having a general idea that it would be a limit of maybe 10 miles that they would be moved if they are moved. And so once we get that all finalized, there's a lot that remains to be determined about funding and so on. But this company, Building Restoration Specialties, should be getting us a cost estimate soon, and that will be tremendously helpful in deciding where we go from here. And that's about all I can think of at the moment, but glad to take questions. Thank you.
Questions? Fred, can you hand a mic back there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here, especially our CDOT friends. We really appreciate it. My name's Richard Binzel. I'm a Stonehenge resident just to the north, at that north pillar. I just have a question in that plan. Where did safety come into play? When CDOT had to approve something, but it's an unsafe intersection, and I'll follow up. But where did the safety plan come into play?
Jim, do you have I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it is just because being a resident there, it's a very unsafe intersection by vehicle or by pedestrian.
So you're talking about just the intersection regardless of the pillars being in that intersection?
Let me give you a very specific example. Walk from that intersection west to the bus stop.
Yeah.
And not be killed.
Yeah, that would be a great question for our traffic section there. And,
Okay.
and this is separate from that. We know there's been issues at that intersection. There's probably been a lot of accidents in there, probably some severe accidents.
Yeah.
But does it warrant signals at this time or any kind of modifications?
No.
We don't know that. That'd be a question for them.
Well, there's no way to get from that intersection to the bus stop as you're going west or north.
Or north, yep.
And, there are kids in the neighborhood, they're riding their bikes, they're going over to Safeway. Someone's going to get killed, and it's going to be a kid. And some intermediate solution is really quite necessary.
And I will take that to our traffic engineers that are, they lead the safety efforts there, and I'll make sure that they
That would be
are
great.
aware of those concerns at that
And all I
intersection.
just say is walk from that intersection west to the bus stop and see if your life continues.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, that is heard, you bet.
Other questions?
Thanks.
I don't need them.
microphone, I don't think.
The people online want to hear you.
Oh, we're online, okay, I apologize. I'm Carl Anuta, and I've been involved in history in this county for about as long as I've lived here, and that's almost 70 years, I guess, 65. And I got to admit, I'm embarrassed for an awful lot of people. It sounds to me like not only did CDOT screw up, the County of Boulder screwed up, the Historic Preservation Board of Boulder County screwed up, Historic Boulder has screwed up. A lot of us have kind of ignored that situation. We've driven, the DAR has, all of us have driven through those pillars, between those pillars for many, many years. And none of us have done anything about it other than to say, oh, that's nice memorial to World War I. And I can remember when the cannon was there, and I can remember when the cannon was on Legion Hill also. And I got to compliment you, Bill, and Rotary, particularly for coming up with doing something on this. One question, obviously, in that whole corner must be redesigned with the safety in mind. Number two, I don't think the pillars are able to stay there, although it would be nice. But in order to do that, there's going to have to be a piece of land that we're going to have to find. The funding on this is out of my mind. I don't know who's going to come up with it. I can guarantee you the county commissioner is going to be reluctant to put a lot of money into it, but they should. And maybe the city of Lafayette and Louisville too. I got to thank you all for getting onto this, and I got to apologize. I got to apologize for those of us in the historic field who haven't done anything on this for 50 years.
Thanks, Carl. Other questions?
Two questions. One is, who owns the pillars now?
Nobody knows. CDOT believes they do. I will tell you as a lawyer, and I don't want to get off on this, I've spent several weeks investigating it, and I don't know. It's more likely than not CDOT, but I'd say 60-40 that CDOT owns it. And there may be a piece of paper out there that I haven't found yet that'll answer that question.
Okay, another question for you, Bill. During your presentation, when you were talking about the why, you said in the context of something couldn't be done because it was private property. Whose property is it, or was it at that time?
At that time, the property to the north was owned by a gentleman named Morris Spishikoff, a farmer. CDOT subsequently condemned some of that property for the widening, but when it was originally built, Spishikoff owned it, and where those billboards were on Spishikoff's property. To the south, I forget, it was Prince Reservoir number 1 or 2, I can't remember, which was and still is owned by the town of Erie. So if you step off the right-hand turn lane and take 3 steps, you're in the town of Erie, on town of Erie land.
Thank you.
But aren't the pillars on the right-of-way?
The pillars are on the right-of-way as best I can tell by about 3 or 4 feet on both north and south.
If I could just throw in, when I say that CDOT owns the pillars, it's most, CDOT owning the pillars, I think, is mainly by default. Just seriously. Yeah, I don't, personally, I doubt there is any kind of record of ownership, but for now, I think our assumption is that they're owned by CDOT by default.
Did you do a title check on it, Bill?
Yes.
I've got a question. My voice is really bad tonight, but my question is, it's a bigger picture question. how do you make these monuments relevant for the 21st century? So if you're going to replace them or put them somewhere else, how is that going to be crafted in a way that makes them something that we can relate to and that our commissioners are going to want to fund because it's to what purpose? And that might tell you where you want to locate them.
You might identify yourself, sir.
Yeah. My name is Leonard Siegel. I sound like Bugsy Siegel tonight. Sorry about that. And I'm the executive director of Historic Boulder, so I'm one of those organizations that's been on the sideline for too long, and so we're coming to the plate now. Thank you.
Well, I'll take a quick crack at that, and then I'll let everybody else on the panel take a crack at it. Short answer is I don't know. People have asked me since I've been working on this for 9 months, Bill, what do you want to see happen? And I don't have an answer. There are so many variables going on here now. I don't know. And as Gail mentioned, what's sort of gotten lost in all this is the fact that the Road of Remembrance and the Gateway Park and the pillars were all intended to honor the veterans of World War I. How we get back to that, that's why I think Jason and I and Jim are hoping that people in this community will have some really good ideas. There's a lot of brain power in this room, a lot of brain power in this community, and I keep waiting for somebody to come up with a eureka moment where we can say, that'll do it.
Thanks, Bill. I said before that I thought this is a teachable moment. So if we're thinking about who we might want to educate about the war to end all wars, or the Great War, or however we phrase it, we need to think about a place that has interpretive pieces and think about a place that creates the ability to reflect and to learn on purposes. What I want to create in a small way is the same feeling that I got when I went to the wall in D.C. and touched the wall and touched the name of a high school friend. We have an opportunity to find a way to do that. I don't know what the solution is or where that is, but that's the intent that I'd like to see.
I have an opinion, but I don't want to hold back on it because I think the way it's set, the pillars need to be closer to each other. Being 80 feet apart is just beyond reason. And like you just said, they need to be in a place where it makes sense to have them. One of the places, if you go down to Arapahoe, it's going to be too wide. I mean, the street itself there's like 18 places, and I went through every corner between Boulder. And by the way, it's 9.1 miles from the markers to City Court. It's not 9, but maybe you should call it 9.1 mark. But also, and then there's places like the Legion Park is one of the options, which it ties into it. Now, Legion Park also has a 99-year lease that comes up in 10 years. So I don't know what their plans for that are, but there are some solutions out there. And then,
Yeah, I don't know any of the potential relocation sites. I'm not really even familiar with Legion Park, is it? But I think what Gail said is really important, that just that their function as war memorials should really be preserved and kind of enhanced. I'm not sure exactly how, because I think a lot of people think, oh, World War I, that's ancient history, and the Vietnam War is a little more relevant to people our age. So anyway, I would just say that whatever we do, I just would like it to be really continuing to honor the soldiers and the sacrifices they made. That's about it.
You know, we put up a memorial for the, I can't think of the name of the mine that collapsed out roughly where, halfway between here and Broomfield. Monarch Mine. There is a memorial in the shopping center out there. I wonder if these pillars wouldn't fit within one of those two shopping centers which have been fighting with each other for X number of years. And that's a thought, not to split them up, but put both of them in one place. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just had a quick question. Do you know what happened to the cannon that used to be at Legion Park?
The cannon that used to be at Legion Park, there were two cannons at Legion Park. One of them was scrapped. The other one was taken by the Colorado National Guard to the Legion facility out on 28th Street. They spent 3 years, I think, maybe longer, restoring it, and it's now out at the Legion, Boulder Legion Post 10, which is on just off 28th, and it looks very nice. I mean, I've seen it. It's yeah. So that the other three are long gone. The one that was at 9 Mile Corner is gone. The second one at Legion Park is gone, and the third one, I think, was somewhere in a city park somewhere, and it's gone. But that one is still left. Anything else, Jancy? Can you reach or want this one?
Well, if it's possible to maybe challenge everyone, besides the war memorials, there's also the memorial of just that corner in going into Boulder. If I had my thoughts, I want to still have that feeling as I go by that intersection, and somehow maybe architect or someone else can develop a concept so that I'd like to not lose that, because there's more than just honoring those that have died during World War I. There's more to that corner than that. So it'd be quite a challenge to see how that can be preserved, but perhaps it can be.
Thanks, Jancy.
I'm Barbara Farher. I want to second that. I can remember, I'm so old that I can remember back when, before the turnpike went in, that was the way you came to Boulder. This was not about being diverted, or this was how you came to, it was the gateway to Boulder. And so if you're coming up from Denver to go to Boulder, that's how you came. And if I can remember leaving Boulder to go to Fort Collins and going through that corner and then coming home that way, that was the gateway to home. So it had that historic, I mean, to me, it is a historic gateway. So I wanted to say that. I want to say one other thing. I hope CDOT will do some field work, go out and inspect places and think about what's there, just eyes on, you know, for everything, before signing any papers or anything. Just take a good look. And also you might want to, the other thing you might want to do is get in touch with old people about the site. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Question or comment? I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. It's a wet night and a little chilly out, but I'm glad everybody came. I will reiterate that the next, or the first actual public forum where we're going to really debate and talk about the alternatives will be in about 2 weeks, April 12th at the Lafayette Y. I hope to see all of you there. It will also be virtual, so if for some reason you can't attend or don't feel like attending, you can participate online. With that, thank you for coming. I Don't know whether Mike has eaten all the cookies back there or not yet, but there are some cookies and pop. Feel free to stay around and chat with any of us, or enjoy this wonderful, well, enjoy is a harsh word. Look at and remember the people who are remembered on these walls. Thank you.